Hi guys, welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I'm really glad that you tuned in. My name is Xaira. I am a second year history student at the University of Oxford, and today I'm going to be reviewing my second term of my second year at Oxford University. So just a quick structural breakdown. The way that our academic years work at Oxford University is that we have 3 terms. So our winter/autumn term is called Michaelmas, our spring term is called our spring term is called Hilary, so that's the term that I'll be reviewing today. And then our summer term is called Trinity, which I will be starting in a week. So I am going to introduce, I've already done that. Sorry, I'm just reading out my notes and they're on my phone. So if you catch me looking down, I'm looking down on my notes on my phone. So the way that Oxford usually teaches history is that students will take 2 modules per term. So I already did 2 modules in Michaelmas. I did 2 modules in Hilary as well. So the 2 modules I did were disciplines, which are kind of an approach to history or a lens of history, which I don't really like using the word lenses because it's quite reductive, but that's the best possible way I can explain it to a person that doesn't actually do the subject. And then I was also doing my main module, which was my further subject, and my further subject was called Transitions and Transformations in African History circa 1800 to 1950, 1960. This was a source-based paper. So this paper was a class and tutorial kind of structure. So I would have my classes on Thursdays and then my tutorials on Mondays, the coming Monday. So I would have to hand in my essays on Sunday. It was also a presentation based kind of module. So not presentation, yeah, presentation based. So in the classes we would all take turns in presenting an essay question or a source for that week. It meant, the structure of this kind of meant that I was able to consolidate a lot of reading and a lot of the information and facts that I've already gone over, and also kind of tick off anything that I had missed out, and kind of reorganize my reading or reshift my reading in order to kind of make sure that I'm getting the main concepts and the main events down onto my notes and into my essays. So one thing that I've noticed about the course is that the course conveners and like the people that kind of orchestrate the course, they tried really hard to set it apart from its predecessor, which was called Imperialism in African History or something like that. Mostly because I think they realized that it's quite problematic to characterize African history by its imperialistic and colonialist history, mostly because Africa is much more than that. African people are much more than that. So in order to kind of emphasize these themes of African agency and African intersectionality, it needed to move away from that whole imperialist and colonialist narrative. But however, because it's Oxford and the kind of sources and the literature that they have access to, and the literature that we can read in English, it means that it will still be very European based in terms of the sources that we have access to. And we did have quite a lot of European sources, but we also did have a diverse examples of African sources from different African communities, African actors, African countries. So that was really interesting, and I really appreciated that the effort that they went into doing that. One thing that I kind of realized was that the historiography was also very based on African agency and intersectionality, and kind of not looking at Africa being defined in the terms of its interactions with external forces or non-African forces, such as the Arab slave trade, such as the European transatlantic slave trade, which has predominantly been the narrative that Africa has been characterized by. But characterizing or looking at Africans through an internal lens, and looking at them through the identities that formed within the internal communities, within events that happened within actual African communities that weren't defined by very, I don't want to call them insignificant, but other things such as the slave trade and their interactions with Europeans. So I think that's something that they really wanted to emphasize within the course, and again, I really appreciated, and I kind of took that and ran with it in a lot of my essays. So my favorite essays were on decolonization, with a particular focus on Franz Fanon. He is a post-colonial theorist, a literary, he's just amazing. I can't even do him justice in this video, but yeah, with a particular focus on Fanon. Labour migration. So labour migration refers to the migration of African labourers from their homesteads or their African communities to these newly urbanized areas where Europeans were undertaking industrialized projects such as railways, mining, etc. And kind of looking at the formation of new identities that were the outcome of this. I particularly took a gendered / sexuality approach from this, so looking at how certain gendered and sexual identities were formed, looking at how some of them were actually consolidated and strengthened in the process of a labour migration. So that was really, I think that was a really great essay at looking at different types of African identity that weren't characterized to an extent by European interaction, but looking at African agency and how Africans can kind of construct their own identities in periods of periods of hardship and periods of rapid changing, but also continuation as well. And then there was also legitimate commerce and the invention of tradition. So the module also made me realize there's actually not a lot of diversity when it comes to, actually it wasn't even realized, it just consolidated it for me. The academic representation at Oxford is not the best. We only have one tutor that specializes in African history in the whole university. So only one tutor specializes in African history in the whole university, and he's a white man. I'm not saying that because, actually yes I am, because he is white, he will have white unconscious bias, which will to an extent impact the way that he teaches the course, because there are a lot of epistemological impacts that will come out of a result of his white unconscious bias, that will affect the way that it's being taught, that will affect the kind of sources that he chooses, that will affect the way that he sees I don't know, he sees certain topics and, you know, validates certain topics for us to kind of focus on. So there's that. I'm not saying that he was incapable of teaching us this, because obviously he's an expert in his area, and his name's Richard Reed, and he was amazing, the course convener. He was amazing at the actual module. But I would have actually been very, very happy with a black tutor in this course, but I mean, it's something for Oxford to work on, but it's something that I've realized that in a lot of non-European courses, the tutors and the people that are teaching you it are still white, which is still a little bit problematic in itself. You're trying to decolonize the curriculum, but you're not trying to decolonize the representation you have for the academics. So, like, just think about it, you know. The next thing that I'm going to move on to is disciplines. So disciplines is, as I've said before, an approach or a lens at looking at history. So the two disciplines, or the two kind of essays that I did, were global history and post-colonial history. So global history, I'm not even going to go into global history because it was quite hard for me to understand, but in a nutshell, it focused on the links and connections of different human communities, different countries, different identities in formulating history, and it posits that history can't be written, or it can't be narrated under the guise of focusing on one community or focusing on one geographical boundary, because then you start to ignore the impacts that other communities, that other external events, that other political actors had on certain events within that country, within that area, etc. So for example, global history kind of doesn't recognize the validity of nationalist history, mostly because nationalist history, for it to be nationalist history, has to be presupposed within a geographical boundary. So because of that, having that geographical boundary means that it's quite hard to bring in other external characters that might have impacted nationalist narratives within that history. So yeah, I did really bad at explaining that. If you can tell, I didn't really get it. I did my best, but yeah, it wasn't we're gonna go back to that. I still have a whole year to kind of understand what it is. And then post-colonial history. So post-colonial history, it was quite, a lot of it was quite postmodernist. The main kind of theorists that we looked at were Spivak and her theories on third world feminism, or the third world feminist, and the idea of the subaltern and subaltern studies. And we also looked at Fanon. We didn't really look at bell hooks, but she was mentioned in there. And so the whole essay idea was provincializing Europe. Provincializing Europe was mostly about kind of understanding the epistemological ramifications of European supremacy, of the idea of the West, and kind of understanding how this affects the writing of non-European people, the record keeping of non-European people, etc. That's literally the tip of the iceberg. It goes way deeper than that. It's very, very complicated, as I've said before. But also having the awareness as we were writing the essays that we were also in a point of privilege, writing from a Western institution. We had access to certain resources. We only speak English. Well, I don't only speak English, but a lot of the people that were doing the course only speak, and okay, I'm not going to generalize, but we were studying it in English. We weren't studying it in the language of these communities, which also has a certain impact on the way that we will write about them. So looking at the cultural and the cultural and the social ramifications of this as well is also very important when you're writing your essays about post-colonial history and post-colonial literature and theory. So one thing that I really enjoyed was the fact that my disciplines and my further subjects kind of solidified each other, because a lot of the literature that I was reading in the post-colonial and a lot of the literature that I was reading in for the African transitions and transformations in African module, well, more so the decolonization the decolonization topic, they kind of fed into each other a lot, and the ideas kind of connected. That kind of makes sense, but I really enjoyed that because it meant that I didn't have to do that much reading. Because some of the reading on my decolonization paper was also present on my post-colonial theory and literature paper, which was great for Xaira, because I don't like doing things if I don't have to do them. So yeah, that boosted up my efficiency. So one thing that I really appreciated was realizing my own capabilities and kind of coming to my own source a little bit, and not being scared of the originality of my own ideas. I think that's something that I've been scared to do for quite a while, a year and a half, is thinking that my ideas were not valid and my ideas were not good enough to even put in my own essay, needless to talk about discussing them in tutorials. If you've done the reading to a certain extent and you've brainstormed and you've done all you possibly can, some of your ideas will actually be valid, and some of your ideas will actually be, the originality of your ideas will actually contribute a lot to the improvement of your essays. And it will also improve your writing style as well, and kind of separate your writing styles from others. So if you really want to succeed in history, well, not succeed because like I'm not finished yet, but if you want to do well in a term, you really need to understand that structuring your course well is pivotal and so important. And that's something that I can really appreciate from Oxford University, is that we kind of have agency to structure our course to a certain extent. I was able to pick my further subjects. I was able to pick some of the disciplines that I was able to do, and because of that, as I mentioned before, my reading was kind of dwindled down, which meant that I had less stress, and the breadth wasn't as much. But also consolidating ideas and like continuously interacting with the same concepts leads to the improvement of retention of information and retention of how to, you know, write in a certain way, how to argue in a certain way. So I really appreciated that. In terms of mental health, sometimes in Hillary term, I felt like I was really spinning out of control, and I felt like sometimes anxiety would really get the best of me, especially when I was doing essays that were a bit overwhelming in terms of the reading. I feel like for my Africa essay, because it's such a it's such a subject that's very close to my heart. Not getting sentimental, but I wanted to do it justice. So I would kind of pressure myself to do as much reading as I can, and trying to understand such difficult concepts when I felt like I should have just done the best that I could, and I would have been proud of myself either way. But yeah, but I feel like next time I need to find ways, healthier ways of coping with healthier ways of coping with anxiety and feeling like I'm spiraling out of control, like going on walks, taking breaks, needed breaks, and understanding when my body needs a break but not too long a break, but also understanding that if I need to do work, you need to do it, if that makes sense, because I feel like sometimes this idea of taking breaks can become very dangerous when you're a student, because my breaks are sometimes, they really take the piss. like a week's break, sis, like come on now. But yeah, being responsible with the breaks I take, and yeah. So the imposter syndrome thing, I feel like it's always going to be an aspect of like my academic career, but I feel like it is improving. I don't know if it can improve, or I'm finding better ways and better tactics of coping with imposter syndrome, but I do feel like it wasn't as bad as my other terms. So we love to see it. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more oh my god. I was gonna say stay tuned for more upcoming content, and I really appreciate the support. Bye guys.
Never sleep cause we night owls, roam the streets when the lights out, give you all that you deserve. Sometimes I wish we could reverse BBS in your Prada. Never sleep cause we night owls, roam the streets when the lights out, give you all that you deserve. Sometimes I wish we could reverse BBS in your Prada.